gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who I consider a dear friend. He's known to just about everybody in the room, I would think. If you don't know him, you need to get to know him. He is the legislator, one of the legislators from the 4th Legislative District, and he is the leader for the Freedom Agenda team, one of the most successful teams in conservative politics, Republican politics in Washington State. And I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit more about that. And then he'll go ahead and take you through to introduce the folks for the Liberty Fusion event that we're going to have tonight. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Representative Matt Shea. Matt?
So did you guys hear that Obama's a prepper now? No, I'm serious. Did you hear? No, Obama's a prepper now. He actually put it out as a proclamation. He's a prepper. He said there's going to be an impending crisis. This is not a joke. I'm dead serious. The problem is we've all been preparing for the disaster of his administration for 7 years, right? I mean, my goodness gracious. It is incredible. It is incredible that we even have to talk like that today, isn't it? We had 12 Liberty candidates we fielded in Washington State, and right, they're all unelectable. You know, you're totally unelectable. They're going to marginalize themselves. They're not going to get anything done. They're totally unelectable, right? It's kind of funny. This is coming from the people, right, who brought us John McCain and Mitt Romney, who are really unelectable, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's incredible, right? Well, all of a sudden, I get a phone call day after the election. Hey, Matt, how are you doing? Really want to have you involved, and, you know, it's great. You know, everything you're doing is really good, and, yeah. I didn't expect a call from Republican establishment leadership, but I got one. Why? Because 11 of our 12 candidates won the night before, right? In Washington State. We can win this thing if we show up. This whole garbage about not being, no, you can't talk about that issue. Boy, you know, talk about crony capitalism and you're going to lose the election, right? That's not true. That's what brings people together. We're going to be talking about that with the Blue Republican tonight. And well, I'll define what a Blue Republican is here hopefully later, but we can win on these things. Civil rights, we can win on that. All amendments are important. You can't be about all amendments except the second one or part of the first one and maybe some of the fifth one. And the fourth one, well, unless there's a terrorist attack, it's supposed to be all of them. And you know what? Americans want that. Part of the reason people stay home and don't vote is because they don't have a good candidate to vote for and they're sick of the process. When we give them a good candidate to vote for, suddenly we've got all kinds of turnout and our people win. So be encouraged. I want to tell you about the freedom agenda that we had in Washington State. We went on the offense and said we've had enough of this. We tried to work within the system, see if we could get a plan from some of the establishment folks. There was no plan. They don't look 10 years out. They don't do any of that stuff. They don't know what marketing means. They don't know what an issue means. They don't know what it means to actually be bold and courageous. So we said, you know what, we're just going to do it on our own. So we came up with the freedom agenda. Very simple. Lower taxes, less government, and more freedom. Right? We all believe that. Right? And under more freedom, it was simple. Pro-life, pro-liberty, pro-property. I mean, we didn't, you know, this isn't a new idea, right? Pro-gun. We had one of the most important things, I think, securing elections, right? And then we just said we wanted to be tough on the existing crime laws that we had. And that was our simple platform. And we just filled in the bills. And out of 65 bills that we introduced under all those headings, 65, we had 32 that were passed out of the House or Senate, and we had 12 signed into law by our liberal governor. That's success. And it wasn't just some politicians making things happen. It was because we had an army of over 75,000 people connected via social media that we could just send out a blast to and have them call or email. It was so funny. I had Republicans that would run down the hall, literally run down the hall. What is this NDAA thing? My email box is blown up. Tell your people to stop. I'll sign the bill. I was like, great. 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 Now sign the bill on the rest of the stuff we're talking about. I don't know. And then they would end up doing that too because they knew there was a consequence for it. Together we can move mountains. Together we can move mountains. I would also like to say that even if we can't get some of the stuff done in Washington State, Idaho, take our stuff. Heather, where's Sage at? Sage, take our stuff, plagiarize it, and pass it in Idaho, because I know you can do it there. And if you pass it in Idaho, that's going to embolden Oklahoma to do the same thing, and Montana, and every other state in the West. Because another state's done it, well, we're not the first, right? We can do it now. That's what's going to win us on these issues of freedom and liberty. Lastly, I would just say this. There's one thing that I can tell you that not only is the establishment, but the forces of Marxism count on. And that's us not showing up. That's us not showing up. There are 54 elected positions in the 4th Legislative District, just in my little district. 54. How many are you running for in yours? Some of them are inglorious. Sewer commissioner, right? That's actually, we're kind of sewer commissioners in Olympia sometimes, I think. Controlling the flow and rate of it. We have some of these positions that people are like, I don't want to run for water commissioner or cemetery. What does even a cemetery commissioner do? I don't even know. But we started running people for those, and you know what happened? We had a farm team for those other positions when we started having people retire. And lo and behold, suddenly we've got majorities in districts now. And we're making these changes. It all starts with those little things. We had a lady named Cheryl McGrath who ran for cemetery commissioner. She didn't even know what it was. She had to go look up the specific job. It was like a $15,000 budget, and they controlled like mowing the lawn of the cemetery district, right? Right? Second meeting she's there, hey, we need a tax increase. And she was the deciding vote to block it because she ran against a 6-term incumbent and won. That's the kind of impact we can have. So with that, I want to introduce our speakers tonight, who will not only talk about freedom and liberty, but they live it and they educate on it. And I will start with my good friend Robin Corner, who is a blue Republican. And what does that mean? Is it a sad Republican? Well, if you're establishment, you're sad probably, but it's not a blue Republican. A blue Republican was simply a Democrat who believed in lower taxes, in stopping crony capitalism, in civil liberties, and this whole military interventionist foreign policy that we've got needed to stop. And you know what? Most of Americans did. So he said, well, call yourself a blue Republican if you can't call yourself a full Republican, and work with us, because we can make a change. And you know what? He writes for the Huffington Post. So all this garbage about Matt Shea not wanting to talk to reporters, okay? Just the spokesman review. That's the only people I don't talk to. Robin made a huge change, wrote an article, nationwide movement. Because we didn't focus on party labels, we focused on the issues of the Constitution and freedom and liberty. And it brought people together. So Robin is one of the speakers this evening. Also like to introduce Chris Ann Hall, who told me one time when I said, how do I introduce you? She said, you need to introduce me as one cool constitutionalist chick. She was just kidding, but I keep doing it now. So she has a great webpage. Check out her blog. Liberty First is not just an idea. It's something we have to do every day, right? And she's got a ton of information on liberty charters and how we actually came to where we're at in this country, where liberty came from. It wasn't a process of like 5 days. It was a process of over 1,000 years that we got to where we're at. And she lays it all out. And one of my favorite parts of the entire thing is correcting the whole thing on Robin Hood. It's terrific. Robin Hood wasn't stealing from the rich. He was stealing from the government to give it back to the people because they stole it from them to begin with. Changes your whole narrative, doesn't it? I kind of like Robin Hood again, right? Last but not least, Mark Herr, Tennessee Center for Self-Governance, which is, I think it's making a difference across the country in getting people involved at the grassroots level and training them how to do it. Training them to do it. Not just saying, hey, go out there and make good things happen, but actually saying, this is how you make it happen. He's been all over the country, great speaker, great liberty and freedom fighter. So with that, I would like to introduce you guys officially and call you all up to the stage, and we can start the program. Let's give him a huge Spokane Valley round of applause.
I'm going to do something that we talked about and never agreed on formally.
Uh-oh.
Go for it.
I think it's necessary that we tell you how we got here. Because we've had lots of people come up to us and tell us, or at least come to me and say, Chrisanne, are you doing the genealogy tonight? What are you doing tonight? And this is something that's totally different. They're probably going to kick me afterwards, but I'm going to tell you, you guys are guinea pigs. This is something that we wanted to do that would be new and fresh and ready for the view for everybody, something that everybody can enjoy and learn at the same time. And it's sort of developed because we were invited to go to Sacramento to speak for the Libertarian Party of Sacramento, right? And neither of us had spoken in the same venue before.
As the others.
Right. So when we were up there, everything just sort of fell into place. And the order of the speaking was just great, and we played off each other, and we've had so many conversations with each other ever since then that we thought this is something that we can do to help educate and bring liberty to the people, so people don't think that it's just a bunch of people standing in front of crowds lecturing. Because I don't know about you, are you tired of being lectured? I mean, we have sat in meetings with our favorite groups for years now, and nothing's changing. So it's time to stop sitting in the meetings and start moving. And so we created the Liberty Fusion thing as a movement kind of thing.
And Chrisanne will be dancing for you later.
It's called the Liberty Dance.
No.
Are we,
Robin does
are we
a better
canceling
version.
that? Are we
No,
can-
Robin does a
wait.
better version.
Whatever.
So this is a little organic, a little improvisational, and highly experimental. Because if we were able in Sacramento to come off as having planned 3 speeches together that we hadn't planned together, we thought maybe we could get on a stage and fool you similarly. So what we would like, actually, this is the first time we've done this. So we would like your feedback genuinely on those bits of paper. There should be some left over afterwards, because we will improve this if it's not perfect, and do it again. That's the
And
idea.
I'll go ahead and do the British English translation. Bits of paper are your index cards. Just teasing.
Oh, okay.
So that's why we have your questions. So now we're going to go through the questions, and this is going to be your meeting based on the questions that we have, right?
Yeah. There's some really good questions here. For example, would it be possible to form a grassroots alliance between Tea Party and Occupy? What are your thoughts on the Article 5 convention? But there's a really good question that we want to tackle, and this one
do it.
could probably take 2 hours.
Okay.
But we won't
Luckily,
make it.
we have 2 hours.
And we won't make it 2 hours.
No, we
we
won't. But it could take forever. How do we inspire people from both sides to step up and participate? And Matt Shea was alluding to this earlier, right? The Democrats and the Republicans seem to be trained in not participating together. Don't you get that feeling? Have you ever had let me ask you guys this question. Have you ever had a situation where you're at the Thanksgiving Day table or at a dinner with your family and try to have a political conversation? Exactly, right? What is that? Where does that come from? And I would be curious to find out from Matt Shea. At the legislature, of course, you guys are probably excluded from the process, but do you notice after the legislative day is over, do the Republican and Democrat establishment, do they go to the bars and the restaurants together?
Yes, they do.
Until
really?
you started. Now they start going together. So they're back there collaborating. Why is it that they get to have a discussion together, but we can't amongst the citizenry, right? How do we inspire people from both sides to step up and participate together?
Go ahead, Robin. You can start, since you're the blue Republican guy.
Okay. Yes, this is my shtick, isn't it? So most politics, it seems to me, are the politics of identity, right? And what we all do is we and when I say all, I'm talking kind of empirical psychology, checked in laboratories, right? What we usually do is based on the group with whom we identify have an emotional response to certain positions, and then we post hoc rationalize our response. Okay, we all do that. Now, in another way of putting this is, politics is no different from anything else. We're in, if we're trying to persuade people, the citizenry, to liberty, to the Constitution, we're in the sales business. And the product we're selling is liberty. We're doing sales and marketing, the product we're selling is liberty. And every salesman knows that the first thing you don't do is start by telling your customer that he's wrong, an idiot, immoral, has no integrity, is inconsistent, right? You don't do that.
Even if you believe it.
Even if you believe it. And because we all resist that. We all resist that. And one thing that I think and by the way, actually, the libertarian movement is kind of interesting, because as you can tell from my funny speech impediment, I'm not from around these parts and don't come from this political system. So I kind of come to it kind of from the outside. And we don't have a libertarian party in Britain. Well, we do now have a libertarian party, but not one that anybody's ever heard of. Nobody actually knows what that word means, right? And if you say monopoly of force in England, people start to try and remember what board game you're talking about. I don't know. Okay, so it's a whole different environment. So I'm coming at it kind of fresh. Dogmatism never works. Now, you can kind of be a dogmatist for any view, right? For any political view, certainly for any religious view, and you might even be right. But what you can't be without actual contradiction is a dogmatic lover of liberty. You can't celebrate freedom and then even verbally aggress or react against somebody whose freedom of thought takes them to a different place from you. So there's the first thing. The first thing I think is be inclusive and seek common ground. Now, this is something that we have to do, we especially have to do, so as not to give the lie to our own philosophy. You know, we're all about freedom. And by the way, this is exactly how you have to be free, and this is exactly the form of our free government, or limited government that you'll support. People don't buy it, because we're telling them one thing and they're feeling something different at the same time. Now, another thing, let me see if I can get this
No,
back.
no, wrong button.
Wrong button.
There you go.
Now, here's something else that I bet you've all experienced. I love it. We're wired this way. Okay. We all filter everything through our own paradigm. We can't help but do that. And it's hardwiring. We're dealing with hardwiring. Actually, let me really quick. Can I have a few more minutes before I hand over to you guys? I want to do a little interactive experiment.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, he's ready. Hold on a second. Hold on. Let's just do.
I'm messing.
Okay, let's do this. What is that, everybody? What is that? A horizontal line. So what's that?
Vertical line.
Right. What are those?
Parallel.
What direction are they in?
Horizontal.
How many are there?
2.
So 2 parallel horizontal lines, maybe? So what are those? Right. What's that? A box. Right, a box or a square. Nobody says 2 pairs of parallel lines that meet each other at the end. Why am I doing this with you? You cannot look at that square and help yourself but see a square. You can't see it any other way. You are not processing it. You are not working out that that's a square. When you look at that, different cells in your brain are firing that capture square. And they overpower the firing of the cells that are also firing for horizontal line, vertical line, and parallel. Why am I doing this? Politics is the same, right? We think we come to our views rationally. We don't. It's hardwired. So when it comes, for example, to that little thing I showed you earlier, have you noticed this? Sometimes you talk to your lefty friends and they're going off on the conservatives, and the lefties, they think that those rightists, they're basically bad people, right? They don't care. You've seen that, right? But when you talk to your righty friends about the lefties, they don't say they're bad, they say they're wrong. Have you got that? Have you seen that before? Well, why is that? It's because the politics of the left, and I deal a lot with the left, being the Huffington Post guy, the politics of good intention, right? So if I'm a lefty, my assumption, my paradigm, the built-in, the hardwiring is good policy is, the manifestation of my good intention. Now, if we're on the right, we probably don't believe that. We think politics is more functional than intentional. So we judge the other from where we sit. Got it? We need to know that we also do that and that everybody else is doing that. So you have to begin to learn the language of those that you speak to. Remember that politics are the politics of identity. There are little ways of signaling that. If I say the word social justice or economic justice in this room, I bet some of you do this. Got a little, right? Because for you, that's a different trigger. But let me tell you something. We're in this room because we love liberty. We are the people of economic justice. That's us. We can go out and say, we're about economic justice. Now, we don't mean what the progressives mean when they say that. But if they want to use that ground, let's be one of them for long enough to have that conversation. Let's start by affirming their intent. Let's start by not making them wrong, even if they are, right? Because they're not going to listen to the sale. Yeah? And so on and so forth. So I'll take a little break because I know I've gone off on a certain track and there's a lot more I can say, but I think I should hand it over and see where you guys want to take it.
I come at this from somewhat of a similar perspective in that, for me, I didn't vote until I was 40, and I'm 44. And I didn't grow up in a political structure. My parents, my stepmother's Korean, my father's military, born in England, raised in Korea, served in Japan, myself in Japan. And we just never talked politics, right? His family hated her because she was Asian. Her family hated us because we were white Caucasians, right? Disrupting the Korean bloodline, all that stuff. So for me, we didn't talk about left, right, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, all those names that we hear now, right? Let me tell you real quick. So the very first time I was 5 years old, and we landed in Seoul, Korea, and I got off the plane. They didn't have they have the really cool things now, and you get off right off the plane, you go up the jetway. No, you had to get off the Boeing 77 like the president does. I had to go down the thing. And I got off the plane, the first thing I said is to my mom, I said, they have grass too. You know what I mean? I'd never experienced something different other than what I had experienced in my growing up in specifically Florida at that time. And so now today, I'm in this situation where I'm realizing, we're losing liberty maybe, or we say things like we're losing the country. Does that right? You're here because you feel like you're losing something. Well, for me, it's what do I need to do to get it back? And so we started an experiment in Memphis, Tennessee with regards to this left-right paradigm thing. And we have totally proven that this left-right paradigm is a facade. It's absolutely a facade. And I agree with Robin here that it's all up here, right, where we're hardwired. It's a facade for us. And that's probably why we have a hard time participating with others who disagree with our opinion, right? So in Memphis, some of the things that we've done is we have found the common ground that links us with regards to certain things. Like we found that the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, for example, they are very concerned about losing their jobs. Well, they have to do something in Memphis that they're not happy because it's going to cause them to lose their job. Well, on our side of the equation, if you would, there were people who were not happy with what they were putting on people's houses. So we found the relationship there. They're putting something on people's houses that scared them from losing the job. We didn't like what they were putting on the house, so we joined together. You know what happened? It was amazing. It exploded from there. Now the black pastors of Memphis, this is a group of people who are an offshoot of Martin Luther King, are now working with our group of citizens there. We now have people from parts of Memphis that you would never expect that would ever participate in government. People who've never voted before, showing up for government and participating in government. Doesn't that sound great? Non-voting people that you would think in your mind, these people would not participate in government or with you in your community. We are absolutely blowing this paradigm out of the water. This is a 72% Democrat-controlled city. Don't tell anybody this. It's being recorded, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Some people call it not a healthy name in Tennessee because it's where most of the Democrats live in Tennessee. It's the insertion point for federal grant dollars, right? This is where Steve Cohen, I don't know if you know who he is Congressman Steve Cohen, the #1 socialist on the Socialist Party. As a Democrat based in Washington, D.C., he's won't be for long, but he's my congressman. So anyway, we're starting to see that this facade, this paradigm can actually take place. I like what Robin said, that we start by changing the way we interact. When you interact with somebody who doesn't agree with you on your opinion, are you actually disagreeing on the matter of liberty, or are you disagreeing on your opinion? And maybe your opinion isn't actually the reduction of liberty. So Jefferson has a great quote in his first inaugural address. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. Okay? And then he goes on to say, if there's anybody among you who wishes to dissolve the Union or change the Republican form, let them stand undisturbed. Right? Where reason is left free to combat it. And so that's kind of what we're taking, the stance we're kind of taking. We were in Sacramento as just different speakers, and we realized we were complementing each other from different perspectives to the rose, right? Liberty, the Liberty Rose. And we discovered that we had something in common. We were trying to speak the language of liberty, right? There's something in you that wants to be connected with someone who you might have a difference of opinion with, but somehow, how do I do it? How do I connect with them? We're discovering, for example, in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, oh my goodness, #1, the most gun violent city in America as of this past week. And we had a level 1 class from our training program there. We had half of the class were Democrats and half of the class were Republicans. 100% were Christian, okay? And in the class, understand what I'm dealing with here, did I say this? Half the class was African American. Did I say that? Okay, so now we're in the class and we're speaking the language of liberty to this class, speaking in a different way that inspired them to participate. To the point of tears, these kinds of things. Tears coming down, they're like, we never knew these things, right? So now we had the common ground. Now some of them agreed, well, you know, that some of the people in the poorest neighborhoods of Wilmington needed some help from the government, right? But they found common ground despite the difference of opinion, because there were some people who says, look, we've got to get off of that. But by the end of the class, they're now collaborating with one another, talking about, okay, what do we do next together? So I think how we inspire them is that we have to change our language. We have to change the way we speak with regards to our opinion. We need to speak liberty to one another. And if you speak it, the result will be participation. At least that's what we're seeing across the country with our experience.
And I think you need to turn me down a little bit. I think I'm a little loud, but there's a personal story that I'd like to share with you that I think applies here. I was not born a constitutional conservative. As a matter of fact, I'm a recovering liberal. Hardcore socialist all the way liberal. And I think that I experienced that common ground that caused me to change a perspective. And the common ground that I experienced was truth. There are things that we have to be living in truth. And political dogmatic party loyalty does not give you truth. It does not give you truth. And you know, not to offend my dear friend here, but the Libertarian Party is still a political party. And we've got to have a revolution of the mind in understanding some things. First off, we are not a reflection of our government. The government is a reflection of its people. And if we are clinging to party politics, then that's what you're going to see in government. We've got to be reflecting a more liberty-minded perspective if that's what we want our government to look like. And that's why I have this whole thing. This is something that has come to me as a converted liberal. That there are certain things that you must put above everything else. Liberty over national security. Principle over party. Truth over personality. Because when we get into this political party thing, we have a tendency to engage in cults of personality worship. I mean, and I make people very unhappy because they look at me and they say, well, or at who I am. Oh, look at you. There's the blue Republican thing. Anyway, they look at me and say, oh, Chrisanne is a pastor's wife. She's a constitutionalist. She's going to believe ABC, and she's going to love this politician too. And so when I stand up and I'm teaching the truth as I do in the genealogy and the understanding of the Constitution, and I point out that sometimes your favorite guys are not wearing the face of liberty, all of a sudden I hear, oh, in the audience. I'm not even exaggerating. When I mention people's names like Trey Gowdy and Alan West and show you the things that they have done that are anti-liberty, I literally hear people gasping out loud in the audience. And that tells me one of two things. That tells me we're not, as a people, looking for the right qualities in their actions. And number two, we have fallen so in love with party politics in people that it's shocking to us that these people could actually make a mistake and do something wrong. And so we have to be living the truth. And my story that I wanted to share with you is not a story of my conversion. If you want to read my conversion, you can go to my website and go to the bio. I have my conversion there. The story I want to share to you is about someone else. So I've had my conversion. I teach all across the country. I have a radio show that is podcasted 5 days a week. I'm writing articles. I'm doing all this stuff. But I am a converted liberal, which means everyone in my family is also a liberal. I am the only one in my family who has converted, which makes Thanksgiving very interesting.
Yes.
Right? And so my father, whom I've always had very good banter with throughout my entire life, because I've always been this way. My grandfather said that I came out of the womb born to be a lawyer because I could argue about anything. So you ought to be glad I'm a conservative lawyer, not a liberal one, right? Because that's the way I was raised. So my father, I invite him, I'm speaking near his house, I invite him to come and hear me speak on the genealogy. Any of you heard the genealogy, the history? So he gets up in the first 15 minutes and leaves, and then goes sits in the car for an hour and a half, and then tells me, I'm sorry, I just couldn't take any more of that crap. I don't know if I can say that. Crap, that's what he said. And my brain is racing, and I'm thinking, what did I say in the first 15 minutes? Because it's all British history. So this was about a year and a half ago. And then my dad starts sending me emails. And I'm starting to notice that his emails are coordinated with the topics that I'm speaking about on my radio show. So my dad is listening to my radio show now. And so the other day, he calls me, we're talking, he says, when are you going to be speaking in my area again? He says, I think my wife and I would like to come and hear you speak. See, this is how you reach them. And sometimes you're not going to be able to reach them from common ground because we have that hard wire. That instantaneous that goes up when somebody says, if I say the word Constitution, doors shut in my face. Because that single word evokes so much emotion, and people think that it's a political issue and not a non-partisan liberty issue. It's who we are. So sometimes that's going to happen. But we need to be about walking truth and not clinging to party politics, because that's what turns them off.
Can I talk to that?
Just one second. St. Francis of Assisi said that every pastor should walk his message. And that's what we should be doing. But we need a revolution of the mind, and we need to break away from this cult of personality worship. And I'll turn it over to Robin here in just a second. I'm going to read to you a very, very brilliant statement by a very, very brilliant man. He said, the alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. He says, but this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. He says that the disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. George Washington told us in his farewell address that political parties would be the ruins of public liberty. And that has been on the books now for a long time. And it's something we need to, a principle that we need to get back to.
Why did you think it would offend me when you mentioned the Libertarian Party?
Oh, yeah, I'm just teasing.
Oh, okay. I don't know why you were thinking.
I mean, well, so you're a libertarian guy, and you mentioned, I don't know if you realize that you said
I'm not even an
libertarian.
American. I can't be I'm not a member of any party. You know, I'm an infiltrator. But that will change at the end of this year. I should get
you're
my
a-
citizenship
You're a
later.
rabble-rouser.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to make sure that the Americans kind of save the Republic so I don't have to head back to the other, you know,
The socialist.
the motherland. Yeah, that's right. I want to tie up something that you both said. Why is it, though, that what Mark said is the case, which is that the language of liberty is uniting? Trust the founders, right? They talked about what was self-evident. Self-evident has a very specific meaning. It doesn't mean obvious. It doesn't mean there's an awful lot of evidence for what I'm about to say. Self-evident means as soon as you hear the words, the truth resonates, right? And of course, what are the rights, the truths that are self-evident? Well, we know their life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, what put us in this room. Throughout history, and this goes to another question that we've got, which is, how do we actually turn this around? Because some of us feel that it's pretty damn hopeless sometimes, right? Throughout history, those who have developed a move towards liberty have like an actual institutional change in society, of which 1776 and the foundation of this country was one. Right? The appeal that they made in the face of tyranny was not ever to the ideological, to what might be the party political. It was to the human. It was to what is self-evident. And it's self-evident in as much as it's our human nature. So this speaks to what I said earlier as well, right? Reflect back to people what they have in common with you as human beings, the desires they have that are not filtered, that are not political in their mind. You're going to speak to someone about your shared experience, your shared human experience, your shared concern about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We take our liberties back again throughout history. Talk about democracy, demos kratos, people power, right? Now we say we're a republic, not a democracy. True, we're not a democracy with a capital D. But this document starts with we, the people, okay? So the foundation, even for this non-democratic republic, in that sense with a small d, is democratic. With a small d, it's the kratos of the demos that are being lent to the institution, the government that this thing describes. when we get sufficiently offended by an overreach of power, a political overreach, the appeal to the human, the offense against the basic human, I have this right, I get to do this every day, and if it keeps going on like this, I won't be able to have this thing that I have and this experience that I have, my everyday life experience is going to change. Then people come together. That's what happened in 1776. The Constitution is not a party political platform, right? It's a statement of human nature. It starts off with a statement of human nature, the self-evident. And I think that, and because liberty is in our nature, you can say it's in as much, we were talking about earlier in the hotel room, we are free in as much as we are made in God's image, or we participate in the divine. That's our nature. If we speak to the nature, that is the finding of common ground. I say that to someone and they remember that we're not divided as Republican, Democrat, or whatever. We share this thing. And it's the same thing that in 1776, 1689, and all the dates that we go down, caused the culture to say, the demos, the people to say, that kratos that we lent you, you've been abusing that. We're taking some of it back now. And in reaction to the push towards tyranny, we're going 2 steps toward liberty. That's why what Chris Ann does is so important. The lessons in the history, and at no point was it actually that a party or an ideology taught a population and got them to vote. Right? They got them to see that their sense of discomfort, of having their basic human nature, the basic sense of justice, offended. They got them to see that sense that that's being offended is right, and people reflect it back to them, and the people that reflect, the politicians perhaps, the founders in 1776, who were able to say to the people what somewhere in the gut they already knew because it came from human nature and not from political ideology, they were able to get the support of enough of the culture that politics, that power had to follow. And again, it's always that way. The game is in the culture, and politics always follows.
Because our government is a reflection of the people.
Yeah, they actually can only get away with what we let them get away with.
Yep.
And we don't believe that, right? I mean, often we just don't believe that. You say, well, but how did the NDAA happen then? How did the Patriot Act happen then? How did all these things happen? Because they all got instituted without affecting the everyday lives, the direct experience of people. But eventually, that kind of political tyranny, that kind of corruption of these values of liberty, eventually, once you get them on the books, they do affect everybody's lives. And then the culture starts to fight back. So we should all be worried in one sense, but don't be kind of existentially worried, right? It is probably a question of when, not if, because we have been here before.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, what's our next question?
Well, before that, I want to state one thing. It says, the Declaration says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people. And we overlook the word one many times. Words have meaning, right? We were having a great discussion about manifestation and manufacturing today, about liberty. It was great. You should have been there.
And I would just say that Chris Ann's suite is big enough that you could have all been there.
We could have
Yeah.
all fit into her suite, yes. So one people, it says one people. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people. Do you feel connected to the one people of Washington State? Well, listen to your Constitution. This is the political bands which connect you, right? We the people, right? So it does start with we the people, but then it also goes and says all political power is inherent in the people, and on and on and on. It repeats the principles, right? It repeats the principles of the Declaration of Independence in the political bands that connect you to the one people of Washington State.
And by the way, it's really interesting to me as an outsider coming to this country and getting interested in this, that the word constitutional conservative that's a kind of it's also almost idiomatic, right? Why do you never hear the word constitutional liberal? Well, okay, the word liberal has been bastardized, right? But the Bill of Rights, Constitution, but the Bill of Rights especially, in the proper sense, is a profoundly liberal document, right? I mean, if you think what it's doing, right, where the word liberal comes from, our founders were conservatives. Yes, they were conservatives. And it was a revolution, we were talking about this too. A revolution is when the wheel goes all the way round, right? They were conservatives because they were conserving their birthright as Englishmen that power was abusing, right? They were re-establishing what was already theirs, was already in their tradition. They weren't overturning a tradition. It actually, the Constitution of the United States is the profoundest, most succinct, most beautiful expression of the Anglo tradition of liberty that, go and hear Chris Ann, she'll, if I don't convince you, she will. Okay, but they were conserving something in the proper sense of the term that was truly liberal. So they were conservative liberals? Well, I don't know. I mean, it only goes to show how painful and hopeless the names, these labels can be.
Yeah.
But, as Mark is saying, pull out that Bill of Rights. You can talk to a lefty.
Yeah.
That is the common ground. America is so blessed that in your history you can point to it. It's not just that the ideas are there. It's they're expressed in a way that's so beautiful, so succinct, that you can kind of talk it over. Anybody can understand it over coffee at 3 a.m. and have a good chat. It's simple. It's beautifully expressed. I think that America, therefore, has a head start, right? Because this isn't a political document as much as a document as your identity. This is the statement of your identity. So you can approach someone who may have different political views with this and say, this is our shared heritage.
Yes.
You don't have to make a political statement at all. But as soon as they acknowledge that, as soon as they acknowledge their identity as American, they're on our ground.
And this brings up a really, following what he's saying here, because we have a lot of folks from Idaho here tonight, right? The same thing in the political bands that connect the one people of Idaho. All men by nature are free and equal. It's repeating the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And how do they guarantee to keep the Republican form of government that's in the U.S. Constitution? Article 9, Section 1 of their particular Constitution, the stability of a Republican form of government depending mainly upon the intelligence of the people. It's not the intelligence of the legislator or the bureaucrat or the party or anything. It's the intelligence of the one people of Idaho. And that's critical for this. It continues on. It says it's the duty of the state of legislature of Idaho to guarantee public, free, so on and so forth, common schools in order to stabilize a Republican form of government. Not so that we have public education for kids. It's so that the kids grow up stabilizing a Republican form of government where liberty can be enjoyed.
Samuel Adams said that when knowledge is diffused and virtue preserved, liberty will not be easily subdued from the people. He said, but when a people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. And you wonder why our school systems are deliberately dumbed down.
Ugh. Yeah.
Because you see, the one huge benefit of an ignorant population, the one huge benefit of a Common Core federal government dictated curriculum, is the fact that it keeps our people so ignorant they don't understand that the demos has the kratos. We have the power. That governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. But when any government fails to operate according to those means, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish. That's the Declaration of Independence. That's how we started. That's who we are. And the last thing I want to mention on this, because we've got to move on to the next question, because we knew this was going to happen with this topic. So we got to move on, because otherwise you guys are going to drift off and we're going to lose you. The last thing that I want to mention is this. When you bring your Constitution to your liberal friends and you say, this is our meeting ground, you must approach them with the knowledge that they have been brainwashed that this is a fundamentally flawed document that was written by a bunch of rich white guys who hated everybody but themselves and their money, and is therefore a mechanism of oppression. That's going to be their hardwire. And so what you'll need to do is get educated on why the Constitution is not a fundamentally flawed document, the truth that the Constitution ended slavery. How many of you know that the Constitution ended slavery? The Constitution ended slavery, and the Constitution did not prohibit women from voting. Okay, that's another big thing. Because women voted in this country until 1807. They had the right to vote in many of the states until 1807, When corrupt politicians on the state level started working against voters in general so they could make sure all their friends got to the ballot box and all their enemies couldn't go at all. See, the women's suffrage movement was not about altering the Constitution so women could vote. Go read the 19th Amendment and you'll see what I'm telling you is true. Because the 19th Amendment says that the women have that right and it cannot be taken away. So we've got to get a fundamental education. We have to first recognize that we've been taught things wrong. We need to be re-educated, and we need to get that education so we can make that middle ground. Next question.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why they put me in the middle.
So historically, liberty always seems to be lost or won back in stages. Are we still in the losing stage, or have we transitioned yet to the winning back stage?
I would say winning, in my opinion, is a misnomer. We are not winning anything yet. I know history, and the truth that we like to say those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. But that's not true, because history always repeats. I am reading a book right now written by a woman named Mercy Otis Warren. Mercy Otis Warren is the first American woman historian. She wrote a 3-volume set called The Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution, because she lived it. She was a founding mother. And I'm reading through the rise now of the Revolutionary War, the years leading up to it. I have not gotten to the Declaration of Independence yet. And there are times when I have had to, and I'm not exaggerating, slam the book shut because I couldn't read any more about my future. Because, see, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. Mistakes. History always repeats. We're repeating the mistakes because we're ignorant of it. Patrick Henry said, "I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past." We have had our history rewritten, so we're falling into this. And I know history. I know how this plan works out if we don't pick up that education and change it. And so to say, are we winning, in my humble opinion, is not quite right. We are gaining ground with the education of the people. But winning, in my opinion, would mean that we're taking back power from the government. We have not gotten there yet. And I think it's like what Robin said. We as a fundamental, as a whole, have not been fundamentally impacted on our personal level yet. That's what has to happen. We have to have something interfere with all the comfort and stuff that we have. Because history dictates that when we become prosperous, we become pacified. We become lazy in luxury. And we're more willing to choose comfort than the tumult of liberty. And so we've got to be affected on this personal level before we can actually make a difference. But we're getting there through the education, like what Mark's doing, what Robin's doing, what I'm trying to do, and what people are doing around the country in small and in large pieces, educating. And can you remember a day when you watched the news or read something on the internet or heard something on the radio before you were part of this, whether it was 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 30 years ago, and you said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Right? At some point in time you said, that's not right. There's something wrong with that. Maybe I don't know what it is, but then that thought kept resonating and you kept saying, I've got to find out more about this. And then you realized you're not the only person wearing the tinfoil hat, right? Because everybody else is having a problem with this too. And that's where we're gaining ground. We're removing the tinfoil hats and we're understanding each other in the truth about liberty.
Yeah, I like that. And this speaks, I love the way it all ties in, right? Because your neighbor is having that same experience when they're watching the news. Doesn't matter about the political ideology. Talk to that neighbor about the impact that they're feeling. There's your common ground. It's the negative that's coming out of power that is your common ground. And the better we get at doing that, the better the shared identities become we the people and they the tyrants, rather than we the Democrats and they the Republicans, or whatever is the way we're divided. Again, it all ties in. So there is a sense in which, I like the way you put it also, we're gaining ground. I've discovered, and this is kind of, I guess, a lot of what I do, you don't actually have to sell a philosophy of liberty if you can help somebody, and I use the word help advisedly, see how their illusion is inconsistent with itself, right? Let someone see, for example, how their good intentions for their own lives and for the lives of their fellow Americans are not consistent with the political programs they might be supporting, for example. Don't try and make someone's paradigm wrong. Allow them to test one half of it against another. Because unless they are plugged into what we're saying, they will find that there's an internal inconsistency. And they will especially find that at times like this, when they're testing it against the world where there is an NDAA and the Patriot Act, and, well, weren't we just in Iraq because of terrorists and now there's ISIS? I mean, there's just so much absurdity, right? You don't have to take them all of the way. Just tell them that whatever, the taking for granted of, well, what we take for granted, the nonsense is indeed nonsense. That's the shit. What's your concept? This is how I feel. How do you feel? How do you feel? Just ask the question, how do you feel? The answer to that question will often give you the way in. And when you hear the answer to that question, you will find what the path is to uniting our way out of supporting this kind of establishment and the tyranny that we are experiencing. I just want to give you a quote. This is a quote from William Pitt the Elder. He was a Prime Minister of England, and he was making a speech against the Stamp Act. Okay? So he was an American patriot, British Prime Minister. Yes, there were some. I rejoice that America has resisted. 3 million people so dead to all feelings of liberty, as voluntarily to submit to be slaves, would have been fit instruments to make slaves of the rest of us. William Pitt the Elder said that, but his words were well chosen, I think, right? Every time the tyrannical establishment moves now, with its NDA, with its Patriot Act, with whatever it is, right, they work for us. They're helping us, because they're making more people feel that that's self-evident, that their nature is being offended, right? That's why I think we're gaining ground. We're gaining ground. Because even when we look like we're losing ground, we're gaining ground. You know what? There's a question in there about legalizing marijuana.
Yeah, right.
Right? Now, we didn't legalize marijuana in Washington State. The legislation was a step backwards for people being able to ingest what they want, right? But the country thinks we legalize marijuana. Now, any good liberty person should not have supported that legislation. On its face. It was bad legislation that removes plenty of our civil rights, and it's disgusting in many ways what it does to our civil rights. But you know what? The fact that people think that it moved in the other direction will win in the end, because the dial just moved, right? And it's what people feel, what people believe, it's what they feel they have now that makes it harder for the tyrants to move against us. Because we don't fight to gain more liberty, but we will fight to keep something that we believe is already ours, right? And this is why, as tyranny affects our everyday lives, as the politics enters the culture, you get the coalescence. That is the snap back. And I think history's shown that time and time again.
Yeah, and I would actually agree with the whole gaining ground thing. There's over 4,500 political subdivisions in the United States, okay? And in these 4,500 political subdivisions, you have the one people. And so what do the one people do in their political subdivisions, right? Counties, cities, municipal corporations, they have so many names now, we don't even know what they're called. All right? So what do the one people do within the state of Washington in order to so-called win it? I would actually change the word from winning to keeping.
Yeah.
Okay? So Ben Franklin, restoring, keeping. Because what steps do you take to keep it? Right now, there are 268 what we call KTR teams, Keep the Republic teams, in development in the United States. These groups of citizens who are just focused on keeping the Republic. It's a new strategy with a new set of tactics. And it's causing people who are here tonight who have decided to run for office to use those strategies, apply those tactics, and now they will become elected officials. Not from the perspective of we're going to go into the legislature to keep the Republic. No, we're going into the legislature because we're part of the restraint. It's the citizens in my district who are obligated to keep it because it's not the legislator's obligation to keep it. It's yours. So when I think of this question, are we in the losing or are we winning back? I think we're in the keeping it. I don't even know how to properly say it. We're in the process of keeping it. Right, Robert? We're in the process of keeping it in Delaware and Virginia and other states around the country where citizens are beginning to apply foundational training, apply it in their actual lifestyle, we call it self-governance, in their daily life, in controlling their instituted government where they live, in their political subdivision, the way the founders designed it.
I'm going to do something that I quite often do when I lecture. I'm going to make some people in this room not like me. Because again, we work on labels, and I'm a pastor's wife, so I should be believing certain things, right? So Robin brought this up. We have a question, how do you feel about the legalization of marijuana in the state of Washington? Well, we know from a legal perspective, you did not legalize marijuana in the state of Washington. That's a whole ruse. It didn't happen that way. It became regulated, not legalized. And there's a difference. You have to recognize the difference. But if we just take that from the face of it, how do you feel about the legalization of marijuana, period? You're going to be, some of you may be surprised about what I'm going to say. And I think that government has no business making plants illegal. Okay? When I was in college, people were drying out banana peels and trying to smoke them. Okay? So if it was possible to get high from smoking banana peels, what happens next? We're going to have to outlaw bananas. Okay? And the whole legal process to make marijuana illegal is based on, in case law, on a case of wheat. The courts said that the government can make marijuana illegal because in the state of California and the Supreme Court agreed, had the right to regulate the commerce of wheat. And so what is marijuana? It is a plant. And when you think about things from a legal perspective, that's the basis that you must look at. I'm not talking about a moral perspective, I'm talking about a legal perspective. This is how lawyers think, and I know that's really offensive to think that you have to think like a lawyer, but that's how it works. When we go to law school, we don't learn the law. It's impossible to learn the law in 3 years of law school. We go to law school to get our brains rewired to think like lawyers. That's what you come out of law school with, a brain that thinks like a lawyer, much to my husband's chagrin, right? So what we have to understand is when we allow the government to outlaw marijuana, we are allowing the government to outlaw plants, because that's how a lawyer looks at that. So one plant then is no different from another plant. And if you want to even say we can't even legalize marijuana from a medical perspective, I just want to ask you, don't we already have legalized medical barbiturates? Do we not have legalized medical opiates? We have legalized medical alcohol that you don't even need to have a prescription to buy. You can go to the drugstore and buy your legalized medical alcohol. It's called NyQuil or whatever, right? Which, by the way, I don't know if you didn't go to college in America. Maybe they do that in England too. But, I mean, I had friends who got high off Robitussin. So you can figure out who I hung with, right? I told you I was a liberal, so. when you think about things from a liberty perspective, it means that you have to change how you see things. So morally, I may be against something, but that doesn't mean that I want the government to take control of it because I'm morally opposed to it. The problem is, laws don't stop crimes. And you can't make moral people through legislation. All you do is give government more power to rule and regulate your life. If you, and I hear this from my Christian brethren, if you are so opposed to the legalization of marijuana from a moral perspective, the cure is not to give the government to rule over your ability to grow, possess, and consume plants. As a Christian, your solution is to get off the pew, get people into your churches, become evangelistic, and bring them to the changing power of Christ, because that's the only moral way to change the moral people. Amen.
Amen.
I don't know if I should even try and follow that.
Well, we can move to the next
Well,
question.
I was actually going to just say one more note of optimism.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I talked about the political change following the cultural change. Now, I should just say that I work quite a lot with young adults, people younger than I am. And I might be wrong about this, but I think we've won this, because think about what the 60s were, right? The 60s were a cultural change that brought in, I'm crassly approximating and generalizing, but you'll see where I'm going, a two-generation era of progressivism, right? Now, those guys are retiring and dying, okay? Now what is there? Yeah, I see thumbs up at the back of the room. The young people that I deal with, and I'm sure I'm self-selecting here, but they are using the internet to read Hayek, to read Rothbard, to get excited about the Constitution. They're educating themselves. And if you look for a cultural movement that has a political flavor today, it's a liberty movement. The single thing, like kind of set of principles that are kind of infecting the lives of young people under 30s, let's say, in a kind of coherent way is liberty. Now, back in 2 generations ago, it was progressivism, and we've seen the result of it. But now the cultural change, I'm sure, because I'm speaking to these people, is one towards liberty. These are the 20-somethings. These are the people who will have the power for the next 2 generations. So we are on the rise for the next year, because it's a 2-generational arc, right? It's a I think we're even. I wrote an article the other day, which is a bit of a departure for me, about feminism. Modern feminism was kind of 2 generations ago, and now I sense a change, right? It's like, now I would say maybe we're coming out of, let's say, the modern feminist era with some being able to take for granted some of the successes of feminism, and now women are able to say, and men, okay, that ism is incomplete. There are some things we've lost because of that ism, or we want to get back, or we need to emphasize or concentrate on. I wouldn't even give progressivism that much credit, right? But the young people, the people younger than me today, now they look at that 2-generational arc, the social democratic 2-generational arc that came out of the 60s and whatever, that's done. Even if we're not sure what should come next, right? We know that that's not all the answer. So when people are looking around for the answer in this country, they go here. The young adults are going back here, and to the tradition that informed it, and to the economic thinkers that inform it, and they're getting really intellectually excited. So I just want to finish this by saying, this is not going on in this way anywhere else in the world like it's going on in the United States. This is why I'm in the United States. I couldn't do what I would do. I travel around the world and I give classes about this kind of thing, right, to young adults. But I want to play the game in America. Because if we lose it here,
Yeah.
forget it.
Forget it.
Okay?
Forget
And
it.
let me tell you, it matters to Polish people that I meet, to Czechs that I meet, etc., what America does. Because I know it's a kitsch old cliche, yes, the shining city, all the while we have this, it's the shining city on the hill. It matters if the lights are on in the city on the hill, right? And I'm telling you that as an outsider.
Absolutely.
So, but have hope, because whilst tyranny is rising as fast in the United States, in some areas faster than it is in Europe, and my God, it's rising fast in the EU, SSR.
Yeah.
The fight back here has already begun,
Right.
and is much further forward.
Absolutely.
So I'm not hopeful because there's not enough tyranny here. No. There's plenty of tyranny here. But we're already not far enough along the curve, but we're ahead of the curve. Yeah?
And we're
Yeah.
leading the charge.
Yes.
We are absolutely leading the charge because Robin knows this. I don't know if Mark knows this, but I teach. The foundation of our documents is based in a history of British liberty charters. And this is what I have been teaching, the fundamental principles of these liberty charters, how they evolved to become our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. It is just, I have goosebumps just thinking about this now. I have been contacted by the people in the UK. They asked me to make a Anglo-centric version of my history lesson, and that video is now going crazy all over the UK, and because of the history that I was bringing to the Americans based on English history and the formation and the understanding of our liberty, we are sparking a whole new understanding of English history, of British history, and their origination of liberty with them. They are watching us, and we can't forget that. The Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required. We have been given so much, and we've become so lazy.
The tradition that we are fighting to preserve is 1,000 years old this year.
Yay!
It started in 1014. It wasn't just the American revolutionaries that died for this. There's been an awful lot of people dying for 1,000 years. It started in 1014. The first constitutional settlement, right, was an Anglo-Saxon one. And I tell you, it's always been the same, right? There was a king who wanted his power. He'd been dethroned, defeated in a war by a Viking, and the Viking died, and the Anglo-Saxons wanted one of their own to rule over them, right? And the guy, his name was Ethelred, the second Ethelred. He'd been king once. And when he'd been king before he was defeated by Sweyn, the Dane, he'd been indulging in these this raising taxes thing and this cronyism thing. You kind of heard it all before, right? So the nobles of the time, right, the little chunk of the demos that was the demos, that had any of the kratos, right? This was a democratic response to tyranny, small d, yeah? Said, well, we'll give you your throne back on these terms. And they wrote it down. It's the first constitutional document in the Anglo tradition.
But the amazing thing about those terms are, your job as king is to engage in foreign affairs and to keep us safe from foreign invasion, but you will allow us to govern ourselves.
And it happened again in 1215, and it happened again in all the dates that were 1689 and the ones in between, 1641 and
1628, 1641.
yes, 1628, Petition of Rights, 1640. Each one of these was necessary because they never stick. It is just a piece of paper. It depends on the cultural context and what the people do. We the people, right? The feelings of the people, the intelligence of the people, the virtue of the people. It always slips when the people get comfortable. There is nothing new under the sun. This is why I'm optimistic. We have slipped very far down, but every time there's been a document that's been in the direction of this, that's made the difference to liberty, like the United States Constitution, there's been slippage. And there have had to be reassertions, right? And a lot of these dates, not only do they capture each one more of the principles that make it into this beautiful crystallization of this tradition of liberty, many of them come with reassertions of those principles that were established the last time round, right? So, the Magna Carta in 1215 has bits of the Charter of
1100
Liberties in
Charter.
1100, right? All the way through the Middle Ages, they're referring back to the good customs and law of King Edward the Confessor. And, and then we get to the Bill of Rights and blah, blah, blah. And here we are again, and here we are again. It's okay, right? Just because we're very far away doesn't mean we've kind of somehow fallen out of the process of historical progress.
And the
towards
glory of this is, the encouraging thing of this is knowing that history always repeats. It always repeats. That's a truth. And if we know that history always repeats, then we know as a fact that every single time a people stand up in the name of liberty, they win. And every single time they stand up in the name of liberty, they not only win what they lost, but they gain ground. See, we went from an agreement with a king to a promise of a king in 1100. Henry says kings will no longer be evil and oppressive again. That was Henry's promise to the people of Great Britain. We're never going to be evil and oppressive again for you kings. But the people forget. See, the crazy thing is human nature, right? You start calling someone a king, don't be surprised when he starts acting like one. But it's a two-sided coin, because if the people start looking at someone as a king, don't be surprised when they start acting like subjects. So we went from a promise of a king to the Magna Carta, an assertion of the people, who had no idea they had any right or privilege to assert themselves against a king. And then we built on that 2 more times, 3 more times, until we came to the Constitution, the greatest human rights statements ever written by men, in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. If we stand again, we win. We stand again, we will get something better. It's not a fundamentally flawed document, but we are learning as people better ways to maintain government in its box. Thomas Paine said something really amazing in his pamphlet, The Crisis. He says, we as a British people worked so hard to create a limited monarchy. We created a government that put the monarchy in a room and locked the door. He said, how did we become so negligent to give them the keys? And that's just what happens. We lock them in and then we give them the keys. We allow the Supreme Court to say, oh, well, that's not exactly what shall not infringe means, right? Oh, that Fourth Amendment has some exceptions in it that you don't precisely see, because we can reinterpret the meaning of the word is. So we have 2 questions here that follow the same path, and I'm going to read the 2 questions for you, and so that you can see how they work together. This one says, given that we are unable to count on the American people to remove corrupt and ignorant politicians, how can we peacefully replace the corrupt power structure on both sides of the political system? The other question is, how do we stop our elected politicians from going along to get along once they get into office? You see how that works? They're really the same question, just voiced in different ways. We are electing people based on what we believe them to be, what they've told us that they are, and then when they get to the office, they do something else. So, how do we fix that?
I think it's your turn, Mark.
I think the solution is very complex and simple all at the same time. It's easy to talk about all the documents of the past, right? But in terms of where we are absolutely right now and what do we do for the future, there are 4,000 plus political subdivisions in this republic. And it requires the people to exert energy, your energy, in a particular focus. Most of you are focused on, say, just a show of hands, Agenda 21? Anybody? Common Core, gun rights, abortion, energy, environment, religion. I could go on for an hour. Here's the problem. You're so focused on your issue or your candidate, you end up missing the fundamental gift that was given to you in 1776 in these big grand documents called a republic. In the republic, it requires an exertion from you. Your exertion, an energy output. The founders, James Madison called it self-governance. John Adams called it self-governance. George Washington called it self-governance. They all used the same terminology. But the bottom line is great words, but what does it look like? How do you keep an elected official from going along to get along? If there isn't a group of citizens within that particular level of government or governor's district, of citizens who are not actively exerting their energy towards self-governance, and I don't mean controlling your property and growing your own food and accumulating ammo. I'm talking about the energy excretion for you to control your instituted government. How many of you guys have a dog? When you tell it to sit, does it? How many of you have children? When you tell them to take a bath, do they? When you tell your school board to sit, does it? Your city council, does it? Your county commission, does it? Your state legislature, does it? Your federal delegation from whatever state you're from, do they? If the answer is no, you are not self-governing. Period. That is the beauty of the republic that we got out of all of this history. The beauty is that we got a blessing, and that's why I'm here. I'm not as well educated as these guys, but in terms of what I'm doing here, 40 years old, not voting, I realize what I'm losing. So for me, it is a grand experiment in how do I keep it. So I have to exert my energy. It's the only reason why I'm here. I have no other reason to be here before you guys. I want to be on a beach. Literally, I want to be on a beach looking at bikinis, eating hamburgers. All right? Honest. It's honesty.
No, it's truthful. I mean, to be serious with you, I get weary watching my son grow up on Facebook. I mean, seriously, I watch my son make memories knowing that I'll never be a part of them. But there is something that we're doing for him.
For the posterity.
Yes.
Right? This is what you see here is the history, right? It's numbers, dates, times, and all that stuff. But what you're seeing is the lineage of self-governance and its development. And we've been blessed. We've literally, I mean, it's a gift. That's what for me, and my shame is, it's a gift that I'm on the verge of losing. So what do I need to do? I have to excrete energy, mind, self-determination. James Madison, the honorable determination which animates the devotion to freedom, or the votary to freedom.
And I speak in quotes. I mean, I don't know. Because I believe the wisdom of the men and women who created this country is much greater than whatever I could accomplish on my own. And so I like to tell you what they said, because I think they're smarter than me. Sam Adams said, if we tamely suffer a lawless attack on liberty, we encourage it. That's right. He says, then we involve others in our doom. He said, it's a serious consideration that ages and millions yet unborn will be the miserable sharers of our experience. John Philpott Curran said, it is the common fate of the indolent to see their rights stolen by the active. He says the condition upon which God grants liberty to man is eternal vigilance, and if that condition is broken, servitude is his punishment and the immediate indication of his guilt. All of those go back to what Mark said. We have a responsibility to not sit and listen to the radio and throw things at the TV. We have a responsibility to get up and be active. We have to get educated. We have to do these things.
This whole point about active, right? I played soccer growing up. I ran around the streets of Korea shooting fireworks in people's windows, all right? But
I didn't live in Korea, so it was okay.
Right. But in terms of active, that didn't do squat, except getting me in trouble. But in terms of what is it that I need to do as a citizen of this republic to keep it? What does that look like? What is the energy that you need to do that? We need to be educated on the history of self-governance and its development over time. But we also need to live in the present and realize the danger of losing it means that we end up in all of the things that they proclaimed 200 plus years ago, like prophecies, if you will. So we're now in the process of, we need to recognize that, but in moving forward, like Heather from Idaho, I love to listen to her talk to the constituents that she soon will represent after November. When she says, I'm not your leader.
I'm your employee.
I am your representative, your proxy. You are my boss. You're my leader. And if I don't have people to back me up, to cover me, to tell me, to instruct me, to etc., right? Then what does that leave her? No different than where she was before she got elected.
Let me mention to you that this goes back to this understanding here about parties and principles and the cult of personality worship. Because I am criticized quite often on Facebook and in my stuff for pointing out where our politicians go wrong. If you don't notice where your politician is going wrong, how will you correct them? And if it's out of line to issue a correction to your politician, then there is no way to fix what's going on. And if your politician is offended by your correction, then he has just disqualified himself for that job. You see, when did we become this people with a mentality that correcting an employee is an attack? People tell me, oh, you're attacking that politician. No, I'm not. I'm trying to correct them. And so I developed this little saying. If they can't be corrected, they shouldn't be elected. Right. Because how many of you go to work every day and your boss says to you, well, you know, we're going to do this process a little bit differently. It's not working out well, so we need you to change the way you're doing. And you look at your boss and go, stop attacking me! Right? How long would you keep your job? But that's okay for the politician. Yeah! But that's okay. I mean, it's seriously that kind of an emotional, stop attacking, we can't eat our own. You know what? I don't have any kinsmanship with someone who doesn't respect liberty, so they're not my own. That's right. And that makes me hardline. Dogmatic.
And there is a distinction between attacking your elected officials from the school to the federal level and correcting. Instruction. All of the state constitutions that I've been researching from across the country, all of them have some reference to the citizens having the right to instruct their representatives by address of remonstrance. Moms know what that means when they tell the child, do your homework, go to bed, right? Eat your food. You tell the dog, sit, stay, attack. Government is the same beast. And so the founders, the way I look at this is, for thousands of years, government has been there controlling the out-of-control people, preventing you from becoming out of control. But the founders created a government which the people can also control, to find balance. And right now it's out of balance. The equation is out of balance. And it's simple, actually, within these political subdivisions across the country, if citizens would learn to be trained in how to keep their republic, how to balance the equation.
All right, so we're going to move on to another question. We've actually figured out that a lot of these questions we are answering along the way. So if you don't hear your question read, it's because we've already answered it in the context of answering other questions. Here's one that we've already addressed on a general perspective, but I think maybe we should address it as a little. Would it be possible to form a grassroots alliance between the Tea Party and Occupy?
The answer is yes. We did this in Memphis, Tennessee. We have a KTR team of about 30 plus people, and they collaborated with the Occupy movement on several different issues. And it was simple. once our teammates learned that the language of liberty does not equivocate the difference of opinion, they began to find common ground with people that they may have disagreed with on other things. And you'll find that the Occupy movement itself, they are actually for limiting government. Mm-hmm. They don't articulate it the same way that, say, a conservative does. But they're actually, when you sit down and actually have the conversation about good governance or elected officials or what they call crony capitalism, etc., you find that you actually have common ground, and that ground is actually liberty.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wrote an article a couple of years ago when I saw this kind of happening. I think it was like I had an 11-point manifesto that, you know, Occupy and the Tea Party would immediately sign up to. You know, and guess what? You know, it's really, you know, specific. It comes down to that. But it's interesting because, you know, I said that all politics is the politics of identity, right, at some level. But actually, our identities that we often think are political are actually cultural. Right, so an article I wrote recently that got a lot of attention was, your problem with guns or gays is not political, right? It's really hard to be anti-gun, all those gun people don't care about violence on our streets. If you actually know and love a friend or family member that enjoys his guns, thinks that they're important to preserving his liberty, and you know he's a pretty good guy. I happen to know a gay couple two guys who have adopted a child. Now that child wasn't going to have a good life if they hadn't have adopted this child. So in that case, I know that that child's in a better position than they would have been if she had not been adopted by those two men. Now I have had really interesting conversations with my mother, for example, about, and I'm kind of very conservative when it comes to bringing up children. You bring someone into the world, you don't give them a choice. They come first, second, and third. Okay?
Right.
So I have an interesting conversation with my mother about, must we not start with doing the best by children? And then, of course, you get to the, well, what if you don't have a male and female? I get all of that. But I know two men who have saved the life of a little girl who's very happy. Right? Now, I can still have an abstract political argument. But I now don't have a cultural division, let's say, between me and gay people who might wish to become parents. It's now personal. It can never just be an abstract political argument, right? Similarly, I come from England, so I'm not used to guns. But now I'm here, and I'm in the liberty movement. You know, I find myself going up with my buddy up in, where is it? Bellingham, yeah. Shooting off some guns. Great guy. And obviously now I have an understanding of the Second Amendment, right? I mean, I get it, right? Well, you can't tell me, right, that these guys are just, they don't care about, you know, whatever it is, you know, well, who's going to protect the children? I mean, you can't do that to me anymore now because the cultural gap has been closed. So often, when we think there's a political gap, there isn't one. There's a cultural gap that, again, gets post hoc rationalized as a political division, right? The best way to get someone to agree with you politically is to not push your politics on them, but to become friends with them, get them to see you in your everyday life being a decent person, right? And the gap closes. Now, Occupy Tea Party, right? Same thing, especially, I mean, but that's a decision. But you have to decide to get out of your comfort zone with your friends, right? Certainly when if they're political division, that's a decision. Do you want to live in an inclusive fashion? You know, make yourself a little bit uncomfortable occasionally. You know, realize that people don't have to be like you to have something to teach you to improve your life, right? We need to, both Occupy Tea Party need to be doing that, right? But they do it more and more when they realize they're both getting screwed, right? We do it, right? The more the overreach comes into the culture, the more we find we have culturally in common, right? We might think that the political solutions are different, our conservative friends, Tea Party friends versus the liberal, whatever. But we have ground, and the ground is the offenses being done to us. And again, we feel them, we get really agitated to the point that we will actually pay a price to change something, right? In time, usually time or money, but usually time. When it's our basic sense of justice that is not mediated by any ideology that is offended. Now that has been tested in laboratories, by the way, right? People in experiments will pay to punish someone that behaves in an unjust way, not mediated by any political ideology, right? If you are unfair, other people pay to hurt you back. That is hardwired in our nature too. And that is why we react when we do. And that is the thing that can always bring us together. We all have a sense of justice. It's across all cultures and all times. It's some really fascinating books on this. You know, kind of social anthropology, empirical psychology, experiments that are done in different cultures. You know, now behavioral economics speaks to this now, rising field. You can see this. So yeah, find the cultural commonalities. Again, culture always precedes politics. Find the cultural commonalities with people who you might initially politically disagree, and you'll find that you disagree less politically as you actually form friendships, form relationships, speak to each other. And don't lead with the disagreement. I promise you that you can find agreements of principle and disagreements of principle with every other person on this planet, right? Start with the end in mind, where you're trying to get to. Because you have to start, if you're taking someone on a journey, you have to start with them where they are, right? Logically, there's no other place to start except where you are. It's no good trying to insist that they start near the end because that's, you know, where you are, or because it's closer to the end, right? So that means find the common, again, it's all coming full circle, right? You find that point of common ground, and I've seen this. I've done it in, I've got up being the blue Republican guy in a university campus, you know, and literally the woman with the Obama T-shirt sitting in the front, right? And, you know, it's a liberal, you know, you can imagine, right? And I talk about the corporate state axis that is the travesty of tuition, tuition loans, right? You know, the government uses the taxpayers' money to back the profits of the corporations that loan money to the students. So the schools put the prices up. So the schools get the profits. The financial companies get the profits, secured by taxpayer money. Who's got the debt? The students. So that had the exact opposite effect from what it was supposed to have. Now, maybe the students didn't know, maybe they don't know that. But when you tell it to them, it resonates with something they already feel. And all of a sudden, it's not about one side supporting big government and one side supporting big corporations. It's like, hold on, there's a new account. There's a new account that doesn't sound like the same old account that the people I don't agree with always give. It's a genuinely new account, and it kind of transcends both. And it's working. It's working more and more as we're entering this zeitgeist, and yeah, people are feeling in their everyday lives, whether it's the student loans they're leaving, whatever leaving school with, as they're feeling, you know, how this actually bears on them. So yeah.
And again, you need to have a revolution of the mind. Really do. Conservatives need to understand what they really want. Do you want a limited government? I want a limited government as long as I can have that Medicaid motor scooter. I want a limited government as long as my children can have federal subsidized school loans. I want a limited government as long as my housing loan is backed by the federal government. See, those are not limited government thoughts. Okay, those are expansive government thoughts. And so we're running out of time. I have 2 questions left in the form of 3 cards, and I want to go ahead and mention them because I think we all agreed that they were good questions and they deserve to have some address. So this is one question in 3 different forms. There are many speak of broad historical foundational documents but fail to move into action away from philosophical agreements, debates, to relevant actions on issues. How can we change that? How do the Federalist Papers tie into the Constitution? Do they have any legal weight in interpreting the Constitution? Can we ever realistically expect to have a judicial branch that respects the Constitution more than precedent and agenda? Believe it or not, all of those questions are the exact same thing. And the reason that we have the judicial system, the judicial branch that no longer respects the Constitution and goes towards precedent is because they don't understand the fundamental application of these historical documents, and they are not taught how the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, by the way, if you're familiar with the Federalist Papers and not familiar with the Anti-Federalist Papers, you only have half the story. It's like listening to a phone conversation from standing next to somebody. You don't hear what's going on in here, you only hear what's coming out of here. Our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, are a discussion, the result of a discussion between these two groups who were not, by the way, the Federalists were not trying to create a large central government, and the Anti-Federalists were not trying to remain 13 independent, non-unionized in that sort of union, not like we think of a unionized entity. Read Anti-Federalist Paper number 1, and you will find that they were both focused on liberty. They just had different ideas on how to sustain and maintain it. And that's the beauty of what we have. Law schools do not teach the Constitution. They do not. They teach constitutional law, which teaches that the men and women on the bench know more about the Constitution than the men who wrote it. But we have to change that here, because we have to understand the importance. The Constitution is a contract, a legally binding contract. And every other contract in the United States, when there's a dispute in the application of that contract, the courts go to this point in a contract's mind called the meeting of the minds. And the meeting of the minds is where the parties of the contract sat down at the table and discussed, this is what the contract's going to be about. This is why we're making the contract. These are what the provisions are going to say. That's what they're going to mean. That's how we're going to apply. This is the whole purpose. And every attorney and every judge knows when practicing contract law that when you have a dispute, you don't leave it to the discretion of the judge. The judge has to return to that meeting of the minds to find out what the people who drafted the contract wanted. The Constitution is the only contract in the United States where judges and lawyers refuse to apply contract law. And contract law dictates that the meeting of the minds dictates how we interpret and understand the Constitution. And the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers and all of the debates and all of the historical references within those documents are that meeting of the mind. And if this were a regular contract, your judges and lawyers would be experts on them, and they would know how to interpret the Constitution based on the drafters of the contract. So do we have hope that we'll have a judicial system that'll be like that? Of course, we always have hope. But it's going to take a vigilant and engaged people to do it.
Amen.
Which means you have to take back your education system, and you have to accept nothing less. Stop accepting the lesser of evils, because it is still evil. And I want to address the Christians in the room, because this is going to be highly controversial. And I'm picking on you. If you can go to the ballot box and vote for the lesser of two evils, you no longer have a right to ask God to bless America, because God cannot bless evil no matter how you justify it to yourself. Now these two questions are the same. It's going to go really quick.
Do we get to answer?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I can't
I don't
remember
want
the
to
question.
About the documents, how do we apply them? And it was, yeah. There are many who speak on the broad historical foundation of documents but fail to move into action. Can we ever expect a judicial branch?
Okay, I mean, I think in a way,
Federalist
we have kind of touched on that quite a lot already. But I will say, I'll say this. You know what? I'll say this and I'll show you this, and it's not even that one. Hold on, give me a second.
Well, let Mark answer
okay,
while
yes,
you do
good
this.
idea, good idea. Go on, Mark.
The question says, there's lots of people who speak on these broad historic foundational things, but fail to move into action, to relevant action on issues. How can we change that?
Teach the relevancy.
In the military, in order to win war, you had to be on the same sheet of music. The same sheet of music is not just the U.S. Constitution. You also have the political bands which connect you within the state you reside in, called Idaho or Washington. Those political bands connect you. So there is more than the U.S. Constitution here. There is your political bands within the state that you reside. And then there is something called prescribed by law within those state constitutions with regards to the municipal corporation that you live in. How many of you live in municipal corporations? Did you know your municipal corporation acts like a human being? It enters into business and enterprise like you can. So it's not just the federal government that we're dealing with here. The disease of losing the republic stretches all the way down to where you live. You cannot flee to another new colony to escape, right? Idaho, you have how many coming from California? Are they bringing the disease of losing it with them? Well, guess what? The disease of losing it was already in your state. The solution to keeping the republic is not the next legislator
Amen.
or the next issue that you resolve.
Hallelujah.
It is you.
Preach.
And so it's education in terms of understanding the basis of how this came into being, and then it's training in how to actually apply it as a lifestyle in terms of what you do. I encourage you to become united with your fellow citizens in your community, not your fellow party members or et cetera, but the citizens in the district that you live in, the one people in the political subdivision that you reside in. You must become joined to them. And then the second action is for you as a one people to control your instituted government. Control it. When you tell it to sit, it must sit. Otherwise, you are screaming at the dog as it stares at you like a piece of steak. So again, I want to repeat that again. You must find the citizens in your political subdivision, the place where you reside. Unite with them, whoever them is, and then carry out the actions necessary like one people to control your beast called instituted government. Otherwise, there is no mechanism for you to keep it. That's why Ben Franklin told a woman, it's a republic if you can keep it.
You guys have said so much of what I wanted to say, and I've also said quite a lot of...
Repeat it. Repeat
okay,
it.
so
Repetition is the key,
related
guys.
straight,
Do you want me to put
related
the slide
straight.
up here?
You got to hammer
No,
it.
yeah. Related straight to that. You used the word unite, right? There's a real tension here, right? Because we often think, well, there's a difference between principle and practicality, right? Like you don't compromise your principles. You're right. You don't compromise your principles, but you compromise methodologically all the time to get to your principles.
Yes.
Right? You do whatever you can do. I mean, look at the successes Matt Shea has had. Right? There is this idea among purists, and I'll even say the religious, and I don't mean that people adhering to a particular religion. I'm talking about an epistemology. The idea that not that there is truth and that there is good, but there is truth and good, and that I have it. Right? That's the mistake. Right? We need a lot more humility. Because with a little bit of humility, right, it becomes a lot easier to believe that the citizen that you need to work with, as Mark's saying, that you need to actually activate with, who feels differently about some big specific issue from you, right? And we were discussing one earlier, and I'm not going to say which one. Right? That he can have the same principles, or he purports to have the same principles, but he comes out in a different place on this specific. Well, in my mind, these principles get me to this position on this issue. It didn't to him, therefore, he's not true to the principles. Therefore, I am other than him. therefore I shouldn't work with that guy. Like that's some kind of, that's not being principled, that's being self-righteous, right? It's not being righteous, it's being self-righteous, right? And there's a difference. Well, you know, when I was at the RLC thing, I used that biblical quote. You know, we are not asked only to speak the truth. We are asked to speak the truth in love. The truth bit is easy, right? In as much as we think we have it, right? The truth with love bit is really hard, you know, because we will sit where we are and go, my God, if this guy gets his way on this, it's going to be terrible. It's going to deeply offend my morality in this way. You know what? You're not God. At least one of you, and probably both of you, are wrong somewhere. So you're on a very level playing field, morally, especially in the eyes of God, depending on, of course, your motivation. I'm not saying there aren't people on a level playing field. I'm not saying there aren't people who don't compromise principle for whatever they can get. My God, there's, you know, we know what cities we can go to find lots of them sitting in one building.
Yes.
But we have to have a deep integrity, right? Your point. Some little voice in us will tell us if we're voting for that guy to follow Chrisanne, because although he's going to compromise on, let's say, the liberty principles, the kind of world that he would like to see is one that I'm kind of comfortable in. A lot of us do that, right? Maybe because he does share the same religion, right? That's a big one, right?
Or professes to, anyway.
Or professes, indeed. So the humility, I think, enables us to realize that principle and pragmatism are in no ways at odds, right? The principles that are worth having, and let us continue the Christian theme, the ones that we might be judged for, are not the ones that we spout from the pulpit with pure words and do nothing to move our world towards.
Yeah.
Right? They're the ones that we in some way instantiate, manifest in our world. And that means, you know what, I'm fallen, he's fallen, we got to work together, because in this area for liberty, we agree. And I think that's about integrity. I mean, I think if we're asking our politicians to follow their oath, when we say we're all in the room for liberty, and that was a phrase that you used, Sandy, right? Are we really in the room for liberty? Or is liberty kind of a close second to the thing that's really driving us? Right, that we'll kind of take, actually, because we all have it, right? In that article I mentioned, I'll just finish it, I talked about how absolutely cool it was that up in Whatcom County, the Second Amendment guys are marching with the gay pride guys at their invitation at the Pride March up there, right? Because everyone's like, I mean, there were articles on blogs up in Bellingham that the gay pride supporting people couldn't believe there wasn't nefarious intent on the side of the second rights people because, well, we all know the people that like guns don't like gays or something, right? So I said, you know when you're really in the room for liberty? If you're a gay in the march that doesn't like guns, or a gun in the march who has no intention of ever doing anything gay, who is more profoundly affected and moved by the fact that next to you stands someone who's in that march for liberty, whose lifestyle you might not like at all. Not that you're intellectualizing that. Not that you're telling yourself that you should believe that. But when you really feel it, when you look into the eyes of that guy who has a different a lifestyle that you wouldn't choose, and you so deeply connect because you have a passion for what we're here, I think what brings us together here. That's what we're going for.
And James Madison in Federalist 39 actually said in the end of his quote there, to rest all our political experiments on the capacity of mankind for self-government. There is a capacity in mankind. There's something in us that longs for liberty. We want it. And the Bible says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So where that's at, there's liberty, right? So I'm really enjoyed this a lot. This is Have you guys enjoyed this at all? Was this good? We called this, actually Robin called this Liberty Fusion. We weren't sure, but we wanted to combine our voices, your voices, and we want to make liberty fuse together across the entire country, however that works.
And to that end, if there are any bits of paper left, please, without fear or favor, give us some feedback, because this was experimental, as I said, and we'd like to improve it, and if we can add value and increase the liberty in our nation by doing this, we might like to do it again.
What our goal is to manifest liberty wherever liberty can be manifested. Hey, I wanted to point out Chris Ann's table over there. There's some books that she's selling.
Yeah,
Is that
well,
okay?
and no, that's fine. There are 2 questions here. What are the pros and cons of a constitutional convention? And what are your thoughts on Article 5 convention versus nullification via the 10th Amendment? And I would just simply say to you that those are very complicated questions that we could spend an entire hour on. I actually have a lesson that takes me 90 minutes to teach. If those questions are interesting to you, and you're interested in not simply my perspective, but James Madison's and Alexander Hamilton's perspective on that, that's, grab that for me. There are 2 chapters in this book that address those issues, the new book called Sovereign Duty. So this is not a gratuitous plug for my book. I'm just saying if you are interested in learning about those things, I have written chapters in a book about them, and there's really no way to address this. I just like to leave 2 quotes, if I can. John Adams said, "Liberty must be supported at all hazards, not national security or health care." He says, "We have a right to it derived from our Maker, but if we had not, our fathers have bought and purchased it for us with their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood." We have a gift that's been given to us, but we have a responsibility to pass that gift on. My favorite founding mother, I told you, Mercy Otis Warren, said, "We will stand against tyranny today, or our children will bow tomorrow." And you can have the last word, Robin. Oh, let me mention this. Because I have the prerogative to change my mind. It comes in my genome.
There's 2 X chromosomes.
Yes, thank you. Because we're always in agreement.
Yes,
You guys
we
are naturally opposed to each other. X, Y, see, we're always in agreement with ourselves.
Right. I believe it.
Yeah. You guys have contacts with other groups. You have contacts with other groups all over this country. If you really felt that this was a valuable thing, let's help spread this around. Because we're not going to be able to hire a PR team to sell Liberty Fusion across the country. You are now our PR. And that's the best PR we can get.
And by the way, then, I will take the last word.
Yes,
Yes.
please do.
We're talking about uniting for liberty, about putting liberty first. We, who have come from kind of different, I don't know what you'd call kind of paradigms in other areas, to some extent, different backgrounds, different audiences. We definitely have different audiences. That's what I'm really talking about. The people who are reading my articles in the Huffington Post are not the Christian conservatives that would be going to a lot of your meetings and a lot of places you go to, for
No,
example.
they're the ones that leave angry
Right.
after the
Okay.
first 15 minutes.
So we're not just saying this. We're here, we love each other, right? I mean, this is liberty with love going on here, right? And by the way, God is liberty, God is love. I mean, you can't, where there is love, there is liberty. You can't really, it's not really true liberty if there's no love, right? I mean, they have to come together. So we're doing it. We're a little microcosm of the ideas that I hope, or the approach that we're trying to persuade you of, I think, and that's going to win it for us. Mm-hmm. Let's hope. Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you all very much for coming tonight, and Mark, Chrisanne, and Robin, thank you so much. The inaugural event for Liberty Fusion, and I certainly hope that as this event goes into history, that history does repeat itself in the future. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for that.